The following is a presentation of the Six Arrows Radio Network.
On this episode, we have Paul Cowley KB7VML back on the show, talking rigging your Field Expedient Antennas. This is the Ham Radio 360 Field Radio Podcast. This show is brought to you by Chameleon Antenna. Versatile, dependable, stealth, and built to last. Hello, I'm your host, John Jacobs WA7ZBO, and if this is your first time hearing the show, thank you for clicking and tuning in. This show is part of the Ham Radio 360 network. This show releases every other Thursday, and the Workbench with George and Jeremy releases the opposing Tuesdays. Kale with the HR 360 show releases the Tuesday before this one. You can find our show notes and links on the web at fieldradiopodcast.org. Also, be sure to check out our YouTube channel for expanded content not included in the podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at Field Radio Pod and Facebook at Field Radio Podcast. As way of news, I mentioned in the past couple episodes, Help a Ham project is wrapping up this week with our friends at Main Trading Company in Paris, Texas. The email just sent out said they were up to $980, and MTC will be kicking in another $500. The deadline is December 16th, so please consider this opportunity to help out some hams this holiday season. I have been asked by some when the Field Radio Podcast will get a gear store, and I'm proud to announce we made that happen. There's all kinds of items with the Field Radio logo, some embroidered or printed items, hats, beanies, jackets, shirts, and much more. You'd be amazed at all the items you can print things onto. So if you find something you want or a color you want, send me an email and I can add it to the store. You can check out the store at shop.fieldradiopodcast.org or look at our show notes. Now here's the cool thing. To kick this off, we are offering free shipping for the next month. So just enter HR360 at checkout to save on free shipping. Lastly, the last month I have been working on upgrading the capability to produce YouTube videos for this show. I now have a larger studio set up and a smaller setup in my home to make more videos in the coming months. So stay tuned for those releases and perhaps some live stream events coming this next year. Our guest this episode is Paul Cowley, KB7VML. Paul was on our episode 8 talking about his group's participation in the communications exercise with Iowa National Guard. In this episode, we cover how to raise and support your Field Expedient Antennas. We'd like to welcome back Paul Cowley from Iowa, KB7VML. We had him on talking about the military communications exercise that his group was working with. And one of the items that really struck me on when we were talking on Facebook and showing the setups is I really wanted to get a show in about talking about how we guy our antennas, not necessarily what antennas we like to use or the radios, but kind of that untapped resource of what are we doing out there with our guying and our masting, and how do we get those antennas in the line. And so on the previous episode, we talked to Paul about the military ones and how Go Vertical USA, we'll include that in the show notes, has some interesting hardware that make these military poles work for amateur radio. So welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
So we'll talk about the military poles. I have a couple of his items. First of all, let's talk about the tripod. Of course, we're in podcast land, so we'll put a picture up on the show notes. But let's talk about the use of that tripod stand that you can use.
Yeah. So the Go Vertical tripod is unique in that it adapts the military mast sections to a tripod configuration. So each leg is made of two 4-foot lengths, and we've come up with, I should say we, a friend of mine has come up with a means of adjusting one leg so that you can get that perfectly vertical through the use of a muffler clamp and a piece of tubing that inserts inside so that you can bring it to true vertical if the ground's not level.
Oh, okay.
And then you proceed once that's done, and that's Clint. I mentioned him in the last episode, KC0JUO. He's another guy that likes to build lots of things and experiment with things, and wealth of ideas there. But once the tripod is set up, then you proceed to take aluminum sections, and they're modified in that they don't have the reinforcing ring at the bottom. So typically, as you buy the aluminum ribbed camouflage net masts, and I call them military masts, they're surplus, originally intended to support that camouflage netting. Then you can start to shove those up the center. So you stick your antenna or whatever attachment you've got at the top, put a couple sections in, and then just start pushing from the bottom to reach the height that you want to. Your guys will be up there, and you can guide it down and work from there.
So it's really more of a reverse jack pull. You're not bringing the poles and bringing them up on top. You're actually feeding them through the center of this. And so you use two poles per the each leg, and there's 3 legs.
Correct.
Do you use 2 poles because if you only use 1 pole, then you don't have enough height for the pushing up of the center mast?
Yeah, that's exactly right, John.
Okay.
If you've only got 1 leg, you don't have enough height to put a single mast section underneath there.
Okay.
So it makes for a very broad base, and it's really only used during the time that you're erecting the mast. If you're guying it once it gets to the height, there's no pressure left on the tripod if you've guyed it properly. It's really an aid in getting everything vertical where it needs to be, and then in bringing it down in a little more controlled manner on the way down.
Yeah, we mentioned how I bring mine down via crashing easy ups. So that is much better way. We also kind of talked about you don't grease them, but you have had success in bringing them down by pulling out the sections. Obviously, that's a 2-man or a 3-man operation to bring it down.
Yeah, usually we do two guys with maybe a third pulling the mass out of the section. So one will stop it up at the top, if you will, kind of picture, again, like you said, we're in podcast land here. One will grab the mast and kind of wrap a fist around it and stop at the top of the tripod. That relieves the pressure down below. One other person can pull that mast section off, hand that either out of the way or throw it on the ground, and then the person who's controlling the release back down can then release their grip, come down to the next section, and 4 feet at a time you lower it back to the ground vertically. Very similar to what you did putting it up. Okay.
And then so guying is another part that Go Vertical USA has. They have a ring that fits over the top of the mast, kind of just sandwiches, for lack of a better term. And then it has 4 hooks, 4 or 5 holes in it.
Yeah, I think there's 5 holes, and that offers it offers an opportunity that you can guy either 3 or 4. Okay. So by having 5 holes positioned properly, you can make that work.
So what point do you start guying? At what height is we are going to guy this?
We usually like to guy starting out at about the 24-foot height, so that's about 6 sections going up. And then we're usually good up to about 40 feet. Once we hit the 40-foot level, we'll usually guy a second time. And we found that gives us a nice mix of stability and limits the number of guys while still ensuring that the tripod and the overall antenna system is secure.
Okay, do you guy 3 or 4? I guess it depends on the height. Do you go when you get up 40 feet, are you guying 4?
Usually we just guy 3. But keep in mind, too, we've often got an antenna that's in there as well that may also be guyed 4 directions. Okay. So the military systems, some of the masts that are out there, like the AB-35, AB-155, will typically guy 4. We found that guying 3 works really well. It's just a matter of getting that geometry right. The adjustment might be a little bit trickier with just 3 guys than it is with 4, because it's easy to get 1 too tight, and then you're kind of chasing it in a circle before you get it equalized back out. His one thing that's nice about his products is these are very robust. The tripod's made of aluminum, nicely TIG welded, powder coated, somewhat expensive. It's an investment. I think it's $55 or $60. His guy rings are similar. There's other options out there if you're trying to be budget conscious. I have on my own kit, I don't use the Go Vertical USA stuff. It's one that I've just put together out of pieces that I've bought at Hamfest. But I found that a bearing flange retainer, and if you'd like, I can get the actual part number off of it. I just bought it at the local farm supply store. Fits nicely over the top once you make a slight expansion of that center hole, and it provides 3 guy holes that you can clip on with a snap clip or a quick link or whatever you're using, a carabiner, to guy.
So are your holes already drilled for that, or do you have to drill? You have to bore out the center a little bit and then drill the guide rings?
Yeah, what I've actually done is you buy the bearing flange, and I think it's it's like a buck 25 for two of them. They're pretty cheap. They're designed to retain wheel bearings in the wheel bearing flange. That's their original intent. And the center hole is just a slight bit too small to fit over the top of one of those mast sections. So at Harbor Freight, they sell a muffler pipe expander. And you slide that in the center, clamp it in a vise, give it a couple of spins, and it opens it, deforms it just enough that it'll slip nicely right over the top. It's got 3 square holes punched in it already, and that's the only modification that's needed. So if you're trying to be budget conscious, you don't have to buy the commercial stuff. You can improvise and build your own. Yeah.
So how do you top hat it? Do you offset for your dipoles?
Yeah, so the dipoles that I use, if I'm putting my 4080 inverted V up there, like I'd mentioned in the episode there with the communications exercise that we did, that slips on with a piece of PVC that 1.5 inch PVC will fit just nicely over that top, and then the coax comes up. I make a little loop inside with a little notch. It's hard to describe here in podcast land again, but that allows me to feed through an SO239 that's up in the top. So it really just sits in the center, and all the weight's borne directly on the top of that pole. If we're going to put up a VHF, let's say, for instance, we're going to throw a Yagi up there, and maybe we've got an HF antenna below that or whatever, we can continue to stack on up, but we'll use PVC fittings to clamp on a Yagi, offset with maybe a T, and come out and put a vertical up, and that gives us some flexibility there.
What spacing do you do between, when you say stacking it, what's your spacing do you do so you don't get the interference?
It's going to depend on what we're operating and the bands that are involved. For the VHF to HF, we'll typically do the HF at about 28 feet, and then we'll run up another 12 feet or so to the VHF antenna up at the top.
Okay.
If we're stacking 2 meters and 6 meters, it's going to depend if we're cross-polarized or not, and trying to avoid any coupling there that might be a factor.
Okay, so assuming if we don't use that tripod, you also had photos of how you were able to basically bring this thing up from the ground pre-assembled laying down.
Correct.
And there are some great YouTube videos out there of this not working well at field day, and you can hear the cracking of the fiberglass as it cracks and falls to pieces. So how do you bring them up, I guess you would say, safely?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. Obviously, we want to be safe in everything that we do. I would not recommend erecting using that method unless you're using primarily the aluminum mast sections. Otherwise, there's so much side loading on those fiberglass sections that it's real easy for those to crack and split, and you'll damage them. You'll end up with it crashing down to the ground. But the overall technique that I have found useful, and believe it or not, one guy can do it, and I'll say that one guy can do it safely if you're set up correctly. So start out there. In fact, I think Go Vertical USA sells them, but there are some military surplus options as well, where you've got a pivot section that will drop down into the ground. You can pound it down. It's got a long spike on the end, about 1 foot long. The mast fits over the top, and then you can lay it down. Get your antenna attached to the top. Attach your guys. Now, your guys need to be pre-measured. So, for instance, when I'm going up 28 feet, I've got guys out at roughly 25 feet that are already attached and pre-measured, and everything's ready to go. And I will stake those out, 2 of those immediately out, kind of facing away. So if you're looking at the mast section itself, directly ahead is the tilt-over portion, and the mast is laying away from me, directly 180 degrees out. And then guide off from there out 25 feet from the center base, and I'll measure this and get it out in a Y, 60 degrees each side, is the staked guy line already attached. The third guy comes back to me in the middle, and then you can pull on that and either with a helper, or like I said, one guy can do it, pull it forward. The two guys that are already attached and anchored to the ground provide the control that you need. So typically it'll offset slightly to one side, and you're pulling it up on the rope that you've got and the guy that's staked on the ground. And then you'll bring it up fully to where you want to be. You've got the stake already measured out. You hook it around, and then you make your final adjustments.
Yeah, that's really important to have that hinged base staked in the ground, something that will tilt with it. Otherwise, your base is just going to keep kicking out.
That's the problem, is if you don't have that, I suppose that you could do it with a stake, maybe a wide stake that you could pound on the ground, some kind of flange to work against. But really, the tilt over base is the way to go, so that it doesn't kick out. Because the last thing that you want is for that to be pulling up and then have that kick back and hurt you or property.
Yeah, definitely. When we put up our mast, which was military poles up against the trailer for the solar party, it helps if your father there, Larry WA7ZBO, has a foot that he tried sticking there and kind of making it as a backstop, and then the thing ended up being on his foot. So for sure, get some type of investment, a real investment in your and how you stake and pivot this off the ground if you're not using a tripod mount.
Absolutely, and you could build something yourself. Just find something that would fit snugly inside the mast. A bolt through is enough, and a piece of something that you can anchor down into the ground. It doesn't have to be particularly robust, because all it's doing is providing a hinge point to keep that from kicking out.
Definitely. So moving on from military masks, you said you've used the MFJ telescoping mask. What antennas do you use those for?
We use those primarily for our VHF, UHF antennas, and those are a Comet broadband antenna. I think I described those in the previous episode, but they're designed to work on both land mobile and on ham frequencies. Not a particularly high gain antenna, but we put those on top of an MFJ ground plane kit, and we've got a piece of PVC that's appropriately sized to just slip over the top and just friction fit vertically on the top of that MFJ mast. We looked at a lot of different options, machining things, printing things, and that was the easiest solution that we could come up with. So the nice thing is you can take a few sections out, and the real small ones at the top may not be enough to support an antenna. Get it up to where you need to be. Clint Miller, KC0JUO, has, along with our county emergency manager, built up some kits around that antenna mast. So each kit has a commercial radio in it, has a ham dual band Kenwood radio in it. In there we've also got a Signal Link and a laptop. And then but with that, we've got a large piece of PVC that has the MFJ mast collapsed down, two of the antennas, the Comet antennas, coax and whatnot, so that you can pick up these two and go. And then companion to that, he's created some boxes with handheld radios that the programming between them is the same, so that there's some interoperability there.
So that pole, does that have hooked guy rings, or do you have to fashion some type of guying for that?
That's the trick, is there's not a real robust guy option. And because the mast friction fits going up, you've got to be careful with the guying, applying too much pressure coming down, because you'll slip that joint and the mast will then collapse. So we have found that typically we go up about 20 or 25 feet with that, and we usually have some form of attachment down at ground level, whether that's gaffer tape wrapped around a bollard and the mast, or some rubber straps with cinch buckles, that sort of thing, to provide some attachment down at the ground level, more so than necessarily guying it up top, because that will tend to collapse it as it comes down.
Okay, so it's friction fit, which means, so you don't have any type of set pins or anything to keep that friction up. It's not that heavy of a load to need that.
Correct. So this mast, if you're not super familiar with it, is a series of fiberglass elements, lengths, I should say, that then friction fit as you're going up and reduce slowly in size. So the top is very small, maybe 1/4 of an inch in diameter, and at the bottom you're 1.5 inches, almost 2 inches in diameter. And each kind of nests inside the other, and as you pull it up, that taper interlocks with the taper of the one below it, and that friction fit of that overlapping section is what holds it in place.
Okay. And what's the elevation of those? They come in different elevation sizes?
Yeah, I think the overall one that we use is the MFJ 1910, and that's a 33 foot is what it's advertised as. The top we found is pretty small, like I say, about 1/4 of an inch. Doesn't do a real good job supporting anything but a real light wire antenna. So we have typically gotten rid of the top couple sections of poles, just drop those out of the kit, and we'll usually be at about 25 feet, 20 to 25 feet there.
Okay. So have you ever used I guess they call them crappie poles or fishing poles? I don't know what you'd be fishing at 30 feet, but they seem to sell them on eBay from China.
I've seen those. Also, kite poles, flying poles. I've seen those as well. I think the MFJ design is one of those that's been adapted and branded accordingly, whether that's the crappie pole or the a kite sail pole, whatever you want to call it there. I don't know which it is, but that's kind of their idea. I think is it's fiberglass and it's designed as a long fishing pole for either deep sea fishing or flying a kite.
Yeah, putting it up there, maybe an end fed, just holding a single light wire. If you do go all the way to the top on any of these poles,
something like a pack tenna that's fairly light at the top would work, or a random wire would also work if you wanted to get it up in kind of a sloper configuration.
Okay. So what other type of antennas have you masts have you experimented with?
On the mast front, those are the big ones that I've used. There's the old standby. I don't know where you'd get them these days, but I've got still, I think, 8-10-foot lengths sitting in a box in my garage that I got at a recent surplus sale. But the old Radio Shack masts, they're heavy, they're steel. But they work very, very well for certain applications. Not so much for the field radio side of things, but for erecting an antenna that's a little more permanent, maybe mounted to an eave or the side of a house that you want to get 10 or 20 feet up, and you're going to attach that part way up. I've had some success with that, and had a friend out in Utah where I grew up. His dad ran a machine shop at a company that built weather stations, and we would occasionally get an opportunity to go in there, and we use that time to design everything from mounts for wall mounts, or we also built model airplane carburetors and all kinds of stuff in the machine shop there. So it was fun for us. But those for the field expedient ones are typically what we've used. There are some options though on the tripod front. We've had good luck with the photo tripods. And recently I had someone who had given me some light support tripods. So I've seen them also used for speakers. These have a small tripod that's really at ground level rather than the tripod for a photo tripod that the legs join at the top. Yeah. And then telescoping sections that will work upwards from there. So those work really well with anything that you can adapt to that 1/4-20 thread that's pretty commonplace in that industry.
Yeah, the light stands, you'll find these, of course, brand new. They're either called photography stands or light stands. Mm-hmm. Not the heavy-duty ones like the C stands you'll see in Hollywood production type. But, these are light tripod. You can usually get them up. Buddy Pole uses this type of technology for theirs. So they are the highest I've seen with the Buddy Pole base and the mast. But normally it's 8-10 feet. It's enough to get your VHF, UHF antenna to keep you from getting too much RF burn, I guess. You're not necessarily going to get height out of it. You're maybe just going to get some separation between the operator. And that's always good to, once again, guide those, definitely. I have a philosophy that any easy up, the first thing you do with an easy up is you stake it down.
Absolutely.
Because they attract the wind.
I think it's the bat signal for wind.
Yes. Yeah, it says, okay, easy up's up, let's bring the wind in. And then I've also heard a lot of on the buddy pole forums is guy first, don't guy second, because you'll turn around to get your guy set up and it'll be on the ground.
It'll tip right over, yeah.
Yeah, so those light stands are not going to be... it may feel like you have some stability, and they have some weights that you can get for them. You can get some sandbag weights that are already pre-filled, or you can get... I used to be able to acquire some ones that just had a zipper on it, and then you would just go gather some dirt or rocks when you were on site. It'll weigh down the bottom to at least make the bottom heavier than the top. But I think, especially when you're doing events and you have people running around you, it's hard because you don't want to put up too many lines they'll trip over. But at the same time, I think tripping is better than having one of these antennas come down on top of people.
Well, and you can find even paracord with a reflective tracer or real bright yellow or orange color. It doesn't need to be a real broad guy, but if you guy one of the sections and bring it down almost to the base of the existing tripod, you're really not expanding your footprint, but you're providing some additional support from a higher level versus relying on the weight to keep it in force.
Yeah, and one thing I always have in my kit, I guess I have a specific guy kit, which is just a whole bunch of stakes and paracord and carabiner clips and just things I'm not really sure what I'm going to use them all for, but they just kind of all stay in the same bag. And one thing I have in there is that orange marking tape you can find at Home Depot or Lowe's. It's that orange tape that you can tear off, and I just tie that onto the guy line in two different spots, especially if you got a wide guy.
No, absolutely. And that's one thing to keep in mind as we talk about all of these, especially with Field Expedient antennas. We're putting something up. We need to make certain that it's visible, and that flagging tape is a great resource. I've got a couple rolls always in my tool bag that's part of my Go kit. I don't leave home really without three different kinds of tape. It's the gaffer tape, it's the electrical tape, and it's the flagging tape on there.
Yeah. Have you done anything with flagpoles? One of my favorite is the Harbor Freight 20-foot flagpole.
I've seen guys use those. We've not explored that too much here locally, and I don't have a lot of personal hands-on experience with them. So,
yeah, they have they're slim ones. You'll see these are the ones that you can find that kind of work like the MFJ pole, only they go all the way to the top and they put a flag. And every picture you see on Amazon selling them, the flag is half bent over. My father has one of those, and he's been able to take a EdFong dipole and kind of just constantly push it up inside there. And so the dipole, it's the J pole, sorry. It's an EdFong J pole dual bander.
Right.
It hides inside the antenna, which is a flagpole, which really stumped when we did the Wyoming Hamfest. That was the golden ticket for the fox hunt. You had to locate a antenna hidden inside a flagpole. So if you're in an HOA restricted area, or if you're in a campground that doesn't want anything other than flagpoles, that's a good option. I appreciate the Harbor Freight one. You got to have some pretty big paws to rotate that, because the friction on that actually is a rotation. It's not like just a pull up and stick.
Okay.
And it's nice because it has 4 carabiner clips meant to hold 2 flags, and those work great for antenna line, bringing the line down and kind of clipping it inside those. It can handle, even at the 20-foot height, an offset VHF Yagi. It's strong enough to do that, plus an antenna on top of it. And what I've done is the Go Vertical USA, the non-tilting base, they have a flat base. That fits right in the bottom, and then we stake that down using the holes they provide in that. That kind of holds that nice and snug there.
Outstanding. I'm looking at it online as you're talking about it, and I'm going to have to check that one out.
Yeah, and if you get a 20% off coupon, you can get a free voltmeter with your purchase. Which I always appreciate, the free item.
We usually go for the free tape measures.
Yes.
A friend of mine here locally, KC0JUO, and I have been pretty active in fox hunting. He got things started, and this last spring we held a build workshop for the tape measure Yagi.
Yes.
That's pretty common design out there, and we scrounged more than just a few of those tape measures from Free Harbor Freight giveaways.
And that's
worked out pretty well.
That's a great Hamfest club activity. It does require a little bit of soldering, so you do have to have a soldering station set up. But we've done that at the Great Salt Lake Hamfest, and we had a local ham do that there. And then also my father did it up at the Waimea Hamfest. So that's a great build at night, because you can walk away with a working Yagi 2-meter measuring tape antenna for the field. And then we'll put a link in the show notes. It's pretty rare. He has them on and then he has them off again, but there's an offset attenuator that is incredibly cheap for that. I think it's only like $12 or $14 with shipping.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he has it. He has the parts and it's pre-assembled. And then he's offered up a 3D printing file. So if you have anybody, or if you have a local 3D print shop, they can print you a box for it. So it just comes with the board and the dial.
No, that's fantastic. I built mine from scratch, and it would be nice to have an option to pre-purchase. We've since gone, and kind of off topic here, but onto the fox hunt stuff. I've since started using a sniffer. I think your dad mentioned that in the podcast that he was part of, and that works remarkably well. Yeah,
those, especially how it is able to change the tones on it, and so stuff like that is a great option to for clubs and Hamfest to kind of get some hands on it. It's a great build it project for the youth also. So have you? I use quite a bit the painter poles, different varying heights. Have you worked at those very much?
Nothing with the painter poles. Did have a local ham that had some and had suggested trying to use them, but the Acme thread at the top kind of confounded us a little bit, and I think you might have a solution to that. Yeah,
so I put on the I think I actually have a YouTube video on the Field Radio podcast. Is I 3D printed an Acme thread to my diamond antenna because I got tired of my diamond antenna being offset. And the painter poles are going to be weak at the top, so you never want to fully extend to maximum length unless you're doing something where you're just doing a dipole or a some type of offset up top with a like a Pactenna. So you don't want to go all the way to the top, and you don't want to have anything hang off it necessarily. Like a VHF Yagi needs to be polarized vertically, and so you kind of have to hang it out there with some bracketing, like my Arrow one I have, and it bows and bends, and then you lose polarity even worse. So painter poles are great. A lot of people will stick those in. We talked about the stands. They'll stick them in speaker stands. Because it happens to be that a painter pole fits down inside a speaker stand quite nice.
Now, there's a lot of different options out there. It's keeping your eyes open for the unusual, I think, is where things can go. I've used everything from PVC to you name it, and I don't think I've seen a whole lot that's been purpose built for hams to go support their antennas, but there are options out there.
That's one thing I always say with field radio is you got to be inventive and you got to repurpose because the things that are meant and sold and marketed to field radio operators is just because of the lack of market. If it's something that's been manufactured and designed specifically, the price point's going to be a little bit higher, understandably. So you kind of have to be inventive. And the best inventive one I've seen, and I actually picked one up at a Hamfest, I've yet to try it, is those spread bases they use for the traffic signs that say construction ahead or lane closed. They're the temporary ones that sit out there and blow in the wind.
Yeah, they got a spring-loaded base on them. And
so I acquired one.
Oh, really?
Legally.
Legal's always good.
Yes. Well, I was at a Hamfest, so I'm assuming that it was on the up and up. But yeah, those they flip out the four legs, and they just kind of have an open square hole because the sign would say lane closed ahead or construction ahead, those things, and the spring part isn't part of it. But they do have nice four legs that stick out. And once again, it's going to be very low to the ground. Those are very low, much lower than a speaker stand or a light stand. Mm-hmm. And so that's probably the most rogue base I've seen. I'll put a picture of this. The Bear Lake, it's a tri-county across two towns up in Bear Lake, Idaho, and up in Idaho and Utah border. They have a trailer where they have mounted several ways to get those military poles mounted to a trailer. And one that I'm adopting for my truck is those military poles will fit inside a 1.5 pipe. They'll fit, the top end will fit down in a 1.5 pipe. So if you use a floor mount, which is basically 4 screws in a hole, then you can screw a piece of threaded steel pipe that you get at Home Depot or Lowe's.
Right.
And then your antenna mast will actually slip down in. So if you're looking for a more permanent mount, say on your comm trailers or something like that, where you don't want the mast to always be there, but you want to just be able to slip it in and go, that's another one that I've seen. Luckily, my truck is not the family vehicle, so I think I can get away with some of these modifications to the truck.
Right, right. Well, we've also done very similar using that floor mount flange that I think you're talking about with a drive-on base. So some of these other antennas can be attached to that. So, for instance, that MFJ telescoping mast with a floor flange and a piece of PVC, you size it correctly, and you can actually slide that telescoping mast over top of that piece of PVC, and something very simple that you could drive onto, set it in place, finish the assembly, and have something up 10, 12 feet without too much worry about the threads and such on that PVC. Yeah,
there's some well, we're going to have quite the show notes links here for everybody, but there are some professional ones. I made one fashioned out of some metal, and I found it just bent. It bent around too much. I drove on it just fine. The base stayed, but there's just a little bit too much play. Once again, it's good to keep it from kicking out.
Right.
But those drive-on plates are actually excellent for a lot of this stuff because, like we talked about in the other episode, your capability is you're going to be setting up somewhere, and you don't know. You might be assigned to be in a parking lot or on the top floor of a parking garage. And then you say, well, all of my stuff is meant to be staked to the ground.
Right.
So what have you figured out with that on guying when you're on a concrete base with your guys and your base? Have you thought about much of that?
Given us some thought, we've used hand weights. I guess you'd call them, basically barbells, dumbbells. I guess would be the correct term there. You can pick them up fairly cheap at Walmart, thread an eye bolt in, and you've got something that you could throw in and be able to stake out, whether it's 10 or 20 pounds. It's not going to hold a high wind, but it would at least provide some additional guying there. That'll work also for an easy up if you're on a concrete surface, or a lot of different options there as far as everything from buckets filled with sand or cement to even water will work in a pinch if it's available. So
I've tried the guying down an easy up with various propane tanks and metal grills. and
I sense a story there.
Yeah, that's when the other easy up flew into the back of our trailer or into our pilot. So I always realize that if you're not going into the ground, and you do see how they guy out temporary things like at Dayton and Xenia, the temporary tent we were in that had very dark mood lighting. And when the storms came, you could see how they had put in big water barrels and, well beyond field portable type thing. Right. But those drive-on bases are an excellent option to have in your toolkit for a situation like that. Yeah,
and it can be something as simple as a piece of plywood, frankly.
Yeah.
We've had, again, Clint Miller, I keep mentioning him here, has one that's just built out of plywood. The pieces snap into place. You pop it out, drive onto it, and you're on the air fairly quickly.
Yeah, that's a great option for stuff like that. So let's switch gears. Let's start throwing stuff in trees, because this is where it gets fun.
Well, trees are all kinds of fun, and fortunately, we have trees out here in Iowa, and in some areas they're not quite as big or quite as frequent, but trees are a very good location, obviously, for antennas. The problem is getting them up there.
Yes, and I've always say don't use your car keys.
Yes. Inevitably, that will be the throw that gets stuck.
Yes.
So there's options out there. There's commercial throw bags that your line goes inside, and it's a bag that's intended specifically for throwing lines. I find that for most of the things that we do, that's far too big. I keep mentioning Clint here. He has built, and every event that I'm at, he's usually at, he has built a pneumatic spud gun that works remarkably well. So he took it's kind of his own design. He's got a chamber with a pressure gauge, a way to fill it, and then the release valve is tied to a sprinkler control valve so that when you dump pressure, it fires. And he shoots mini tennis balls out of it, the little small dog-sized tennis balls, weighted down with some steel shot inside, and then uses a bow fishing setup at the top to spool off some Spectra fishing line that's, it's probably a 50-pound test.
Oh, okay.
And we use that as kind of that messenger line to get it over. And then we'll pull back and forth, and fairly quickly you can get an antenna up in the trees at some fairly good height and with some pretty decent distances. We've done it at field day, winter field day, heck, just about anywhere. We did it out at the Solar Eclipse QSO party out north of Scottsbluff, Nebraska. Shot it up into a cottonwood tree, and we were on the air in probably about 15 minutes.
So with that, the sprinkler valve, release valve, that's just two. We've done that for like a kid's rocket thing. That's just two. I believe it's just two 9-volt batteries tied.
Yeah, and
powers that. So it's not like you have a big battery bank you have to run that from.
Right, and you can actually by triggering it, and I'd have to look at the exact diagram, but basically the pressure holds it closed. As soon as you dump pressure on one side of it, the valve will open.
Oh, okay.
And so this one's even batteryless.
Oh, okay.
The only power that you need is to be able to inflate the chamber up to whatever you're going to use for your shot. And we use the gauge to kind of guesstimate. PVC is a poor pressure vessel, but we usually don't run over about 40 psi, and well within the margin that I'm comfortable holding in my hands. It's been tested much higher under heavy blankets and so forth to make certain that it would hold far in excess of that. But just dump the pressure on one side of the valve. So what he's done, and you could probably do a whole episode in this, is he's got a blowgun handle that he's attached to it, so that when pressure gets dumped, it fires and then releases the pressure out the barrel end of it and shoots the ball up into the tree.
Is it a fishing? You said it was a fishing line. How does it play out? Just on a fishing line rail?
So he's actually used. If you're familiar with bow fishing, they use a system where basically the arrow would shoot through the center of this spool. So think of a spool that's about 6 inches in diameter, and the line is wrapped around the outside. It fits over the barrel, and then the ball shoots through the center of that, and then pays the line off the outside. Okay. So there's no reel or spool to reel it back in like there is with a lot of the designs that are out there. I've seen everything from open face bait casting type reels to any number of things to help retrieve it. You're manually pulling it back, but the advantage is the payout is very smooth and controlled.
Yeah, I've seen some. Of course, YouTube always has the fun exercises on it, but where they forgot to release the bait caster.
Yes.
And there goes one tennis ball. Next.
Yep, next. So
that's probably the most, except for maybe some safety around the spud gun, that's probably the most safest way to get a line over, because if there is something coming, it's just a tennis ball.
It's a tennis ball that weighs a few ounces, and it's pulling that messenger line over. And then from there, you can proceed to hoist up. You're not worried about throwing a big bag or a weight on the end of it, an arrow shooting through the tree, that sort of thing. And the biggest advantage to it really is that it's a very controlled shot. Clint's phenomenal with this. He take into account the wind and kind of do a little Kentucky windage there, and it's rare that it takes more than one shot to get it placed where where we want it to be.
So does he pick up some grass and hold it up in the air and drop the grass? Or
It's stick the finger in his mouth, touch the window. No,
yeah.
He's just he's got the human computer thing going on, and he's pretty darn adept at putting that where it needs to be. But
so he passed geometry then.
I think so.
So he must be the person that pre-measured your lines for brazing up that military pole, because I don't think I could ever figure out the geometry on pre-measuring 28 feet angle.
Yeah, I did that one, but that's the kind of thing that Clint would do. So.
Yeah. So wrist rocket, bow and arrow, if you want to get Walking Dead, the actual spear guns, but all those seem to take a little bit more skill than the spud gun would.
They really do. The nice thing about the spud gun is you can control the angle, and at least with this particular version, you're pulling basically squeezing with your fist a release. You're not having to worry about twisting a ball valve or anything else. So there's almost a little bit of aiming that goes with it, and it works pretty well. At Winter Field Day, we had a shot that actually took me out onto a frozen lake to kind of back shoot into the tree that we wanted to hang our antenna in. So we filled it up, and then I proceeded to get out on the ice. It holds pressure long enough that you can get into position and make your shot and get the line right where you want it to be.
Okay, yeah, I use those arbor weights, but nothing more than maybe pulling up a Pactana, pulling up a roll up J pole type antenna, 16, 18 feet. But yeah, when you're dealing with a high dipoles that you want to spread across two trees, and definitely spud guns. What else is I'm trying to think. I can't think of much more out there that you could launch up there. I know people have talked about drones, but that's pretty technical to have a release mechanism on that drone to not wrap your drone up with the line.
Well, and that's the challenge. And if you forget, depending on what mode it's in, to release the GPS lock or do whatever else, it ends up fighting you, and all kinds of adventures ensue. For us, really, if it's going in a tree, we're using Clint's spud gun design. And if I didn't have Clint's, I'd build one. There's a lot of different designs online that you can build. It disassembles and fits in a Plano toolbox. It's versatile enough that you can air it up off even a 12-volt air compressor in the cigarette lighter of your car, and get an antenna up very quickly.
How do you normally inflate? Is it just a foot pump or hand pump or?
Typically, we use one of those little 12-volt rescue type packs.
Okay.
It's got the jumper cables that you can use if you wanted to, and a built-in air pump, and you just flip the switch, and it does the job from there.
Okay.
And then the procedure that we use, at least with his setup, is we'll shoot the initial messenger line over, and that's a 40 or 50 pound test spectral line. It's not a typical fishing line, so it's an ultra high molecular weight polyethylene that is fairly slick coming back. We'll tie mason line onto that and pull back, and then we'll usually pull some 550 cord onto that and step up to the size that we want to do, so that we can then make the full pull where we want the antenna to be. So, we'll shoot the line, attach mason line, pull it back, attach 550 cord, pull it back, and then attach the antenna and pull it into position. And that lets us get the antenna exactly where we want without risking breaking one of those lines and starting over from scratch again.
Yeah, you'd be amazed at those, especially if they're pine trees.
Yep.
They have a way of shredding very light-duty line. And even, sometimes even paracord can, if it's a windy day and you're deploying, say, for all of field day, there might be a little wear and tear on those lines.
Yeah, it can saw through them pretty quickly.
Yeah. So let's see, we've talked about, one thing, when you do your, we talked about the Envis antennas. How do you, we support the center antenna with the military pole. How do you support the end of those posts or those lines that you want to keep off the ground?
No, that's a great question. So with the Envis antenna that we used during the COMEX recently down at Camp Dodge, I had a piece of line, just polyester antenna support, Dacron polyester, probably 3 feet, give or take, tied onto the end of the antenna. So I had the loop back with a thimble that you'd put on there with a normal guy line, and then brought that out to one of the guy rings. And this was one of the bearing flange guy rings, and clipped that onto the end of the antenna, and then two guys coming off at kind of a V. Off the end of that. So you've got the military mast, if you can envision this, three stacked up, a V coming off the backside, and then the antenna being pulled or pulling in the other direction, and then the reverse on the other side. So it's a two-guy setup to get it up. You could, in theory, probably guy three on each end and get away with doing it with just a single guy at 12 feet. But with two individuals setting it up, that's pretty easy.
Okay. So is there anything you can think of with this? Obviously won't be the exhaustive list. It might actually have to be another episode after everybody gives their feedback, because there really is. If it's a pole, and it can be guide. I'm sure amateur radio operators have figured it out, beyond, of course, the commercial things that are meant for our hobby. Can you think of anything else we haven't covered?
Those are the big ones that we've got experience with, and like you say, John, I'm certain that there is more out there that people have seen or experimented with, or that they're using, and that's kind of the fun of the hobby. And honestly, one of the things that I love about podcasts like this is things that maybe I haven't considered get brought up, and then I start thinking on things, and pretty soon something's going in the garage, and we've got something else to try at the next event.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think I can claim any originality on any of this. It's just pretty much the power of YouTube and just Google searching images. It seems like you find a lot of unique ways to guide. And of course, we didn't talk about anything that requires hand trucks. That could be a whole other episode of very heavy. I mean, I even saw on some field day videos using extendable hoists and lifts. Somebody runs a diamond rental store, and was hoisting things up. So we didn't cover into that the heavy stuff, the tilt over trailers and everything like that. But
yeah, we've used those before. The club out of Des Moines has a tilt over trailer that works really well. We've used we always call them telehandlers, a rough terrain, reach type forklift. We use those at one field day. You can always put up your own tower sections manually, but that's you're getting pretty involved at that point, and some pretty heavy antennas. So these are more field expedient and portable solutions. A lot of different other options out there, certainly.
So would you say probably the fishing pole antenna, if someone is in the QRP soda type ultra lightweight, would you say the fishing pole antenna is lighter, or just throwing a weight and rope?
Oh, I would definitely throw a weight and a rope before I'd pack that the fishing pole
especially
flavor,
the MFJ
I think.
one, because it seems pretty
exactly.
big.
Yeah, it probably weighs. Oh, I'm trying to think here, but probably in the 5-pound range. It might be a little bit more than that. Thinking about it, I'm just trying to envision the weight in my hands. That's a lot to pack for any appreciable distance.
Yeah, I got some fishing pole ones from China, and I got them, and I'm like, these are really light. Well, they're also made out of paper. So $12, I guess $12 per event. If you want to consider them disposable, and you can burn them in the fire when you're done.
Yeah, that's pretty lightweight and pretty expendable, no doubt.
Yeah, and it didn't look like it would hold a buddy pole barely.
Yeah, that might be a little scary, especially if it happened to rain.
Yeah. Oh, one thing I had some notes here on this, but I think one thing to remember is when you're trying to find a base, everything is fair game. The awning, the easy up awning, I've strapped to the side of a sign that says this is the campground. One of the Park Service. Just kind of just bungee pull or use some compression straps. So yeah, it's wherever you're at. Definitely leverage what's around you for supporting some of the stuff.
Yeah, we've used basketball standards. We've used the side of the building, just some gaffer tape to the side of the building. bollards I mentioned, if for instance they've got some out in the parking lot, those will get you up usually at least 3 feet or so. And we've used buildings. It's amazing what you can strap to and give you support enough to get a little bit higher with your antenna and out of the ground clutter.
Yeah, just make sure when you don't guy to your rear view mirror on your truck.
I sense a story there, John.
Yeah, you open your truck door to get something out, and you look up, and your 30-foot military pole is wanding in the wind, wanding around. You're like, slowly close the door. So, but yeah, I've strapped to the multiple points on my camping trailer, different things like that. But yeah, it's fair game as long as it doesn't block access to the bathroom.
There you go. You go. I think that's a good rule to live by.
that keeps you a positive offset with your served agencies.
No doubt.
Well, thank you, Paul, for coming on the show. Appreciate it. And,
absolutely.
This is an episode that I've been wanting to do for a while, and I think it's one that I think will get a lot of user feedback. So I highly encourage people to, if you're on Facebook or Twitter or email, definitely share your photos, share your ideas, and we'll maybe come back with a user inspired episode, just kind of to help distribute more word on this topic.
No, that'd be awesome. I'd love to see what other folks have come up with, and like you said, I lay no claim to any of this. It's just stuff that we happen to be using that works.
Yeah, definitely. All right, thank you very much, Paul, for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Thank you. Thank you again, Paul, for coming on the show and sharing your insight and experiences. If you have a show idea or would like to be a guest on the show, please contact me at John, that's John, at hamradio360.com. I mentioned at the top of the show that Chameleon Antenna is the sponsor of this episode. If you were looking for a well-built, well-designed antenna for your field setup or even your home, check them out at chameleonantenna.com or look in our show notes for a link. For the training item, I remember reading about a list of lessons learned from those who lived through the aftermath of hurricanes. I like the short format and the presentation of the ideas, and I thought it would be fun to put one together for lessons learned from fieldwork. Hello, this is John W7DBO with the training item. A few years back, I wanted to get a better understanding of various types of special event support and what role amateur radio played in those events. So in the course of a year, I participated in 10 events. The following is some lessons I learned, either myself or observing other operators. 1. Never leave your handheld battery engaged in your go bag. Gremlins will climb in and turn on your radio, killing your battery. 2. Guy your antenna mast first, then mount the antenna, not the reverse. 3. If using a computer, turn it on before it gets cold and don't let it go to sleep. Equipment gets brittle in the cold. 4. Spare hardware is only 97 cents a bag at Home Depot, but priceless in the wilderness when you drop one. 5. If your radio is not programmed to event frequencies, you are not prepared. 6. There is no such thing as enough adapters and connectors. 7. You are not in college anymore. Overnight shifts are not easy. Know your limitations. Pace yourself. It's a marathon, not a sprint. 8. Speaking of marathons, be prepared at a marathon event to hand out more cups of water than keying your mic. You are an aid-station volunteer that happens to have a radio. 9. If your children go with you on the event, your wife will count the day as family time. 10. Always bring a comfortable chair. 11. Never leave your equipment in an open truck bed. It will rain. 12. If you are busy and overwhelmed with your assignment, don't worry. Sheer boredom is around the corner. 13. The thought to stake down your easy-up canopy should come before the big unexpected wind. 14. Never send a 5-watt handheld to do a 50-watt mobile's job. 15. Never underestimate the value of gloves you can write and operate your radio with. 16. Your sole purpose of volunteering is not to get a t-shirt. 17. If you show up to an assignment right at the start of shift, you are late. 18. While huddled around a space heater at 3 a.m. to keep warm and you smell burning plastic, it's your HT. 19. Pack extra meals. You never know when your shift will be extended. 20. If something doesn't work, try something different. If that does not work, try something else different. If that does not work, try the first thing again, and most likely will work this time. Creativity and problem solving is a valuable skill. I hope you found these tips enjoyable and helpful. This is John W7DBO with the training item. This will do it for this episode. Thank you again, Paul Cowley KB7VML, for coming on the show. Remember to check out our new gear shop at shop.fieldradiopodcast.org. And don't forget the promo code HR360 for free shipping this month. Also, thank you, Chameleon Antenna, for sponsoring this episode. As always, please send me your comments, feedback, and show ideas to John, JOHN, at hamradio360.com. 73.